Welcome to the world of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe, so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy the listening. The sleek, chrome shuttle, Envoy, pierced the cerulean atmosphere of Xylos, its descent a gentle ballet against the backdrop of swirling, emerald cloud formations. Inside, David adjusted the knot of his diplomatic tie, a nervous habit he'd never quite managed to shake. This wasn't his first interstellar assignment, not by a long shot. He'd negotiated trade agreements with silicon-based lifeforms on Cygnus 7 and brokered peace treaties between warring insectoid colonies in the Andromeda galaxy. But Xylos felt different. The briefings had been vague, filled with carefully worded reports about political instability and resource management challenges. The reality, he suspected, was far more complex and potentially volatile. He glanced out the viewport. Xylos was breathtaking. Towering, bioluminescent flora painted the landscape in strokes of impossible colors. Waterfalls cascaded down cliffsides, feeding rivers that shimmered with an otherworldly glow. It was a paradise, yet the undercurrent of tension was palpable, even from orbit. The Envoy touched down on a designated landing platform, the gentle thud reverberating through the cabin. David took a deep breath, steeling himself. Time to play the diplomat. The airlock hissed open, and he stepped out onto Xylosian soil. The air was thick with the scent of exotic blossoms and something else, something metallic and faintly unsettling. A welcoming party stood waiting, a delegation of Xylosian officials adorned in flowing robes of deep indigo and emerald green. They were tall and slender, their skin a mosaic of blues and greens that shifted subtly with the light. Their eyes, large and almond-shaped, were an intense gold, radiating intelligence and an unnerving level of scrutiny. Leading the delegation was a woman of striking beauty. Her skin was a deep, sapphire blue, almost iridescent, and her eyes held a spark of rebellious fire. She stepped forward, extending a slender, three-fingered hand. "Welcome to Xylos, Ambassador David," she said, her voice a melodic chime. "I am Lyra, representative of the Northern Coalition." David shook her hand, a jolt of unexpected energy passing between them. "It's an honor to be here, Lyra. I hope my presence can contribute to a constructive dialogue." Before Lyra could respond, another figure emerged from the group, equally captivating but with a demeanor that was altogether different. This woman's skin was a vibrant jade green, and her eyes held a calm, almost serene quality. "Ambassador David," she said, her voice smooth and measured. "I am Nira, representing the Governing Council of Xylos. We are pleased to receive you." David felt a peculiar pull towards both women, a strange sense of connection that he couldn't quite explain. He shook Nira's hand, offering a polite smile. "The pleasure is all mine, Nira. I understand there are complexities to navigate here." "Indeed," Nira replied, her gaze unwavering. "Xylos is a planet of great beauty and great challenges. We hope you will find your stay enlightening." Lyra interjected, a hint of steel in her voice. "Enlightening, or perhaps, revealing, Nira. It depends on what Ambassador David chooses to see." The air crackled with unspoken tension. David sensed a deep rift between the two women, a conflict that went far beyond mere political disagreement. He filed it away, another piece of the puzzle that was Xylos. "Perhaps," David said smoothly, "I can gain a better understanding of both perspectives. My goal is to facilitate communication and find common ground." Nira nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "A noble aspiration, Ambassador. We shall see if it is achievable." Lyra remained silent, her eyes fixed on David, as if trying to gauge his true intentions. He felt under her scrutiny, uncertain how to proceed. This was already far more complicated than the sterile reports had suggested. The delegation escorted David to a waiting transport, a sleek, levitating platform that glided effortlessly above the ground. As they traveled towards the capital city, Lyra and Nira flanked him, their presence both alluring and unsettling. Xylos is facing a critical juncture, Nira explained, gesturing towards the landscape. The discovery of xylium, a mineral with unparalleled energy potential, has created friction. Friction is a polite understatement, Lyra countered, her voice laced with bitterness. The governing council, under the influence of General Kale, is exploiting xylium for their own gain, leaving the Northern Coalition and its people to suffer. The council is working to ensure the responsible distribution of xylium's benefits, Nira retorted, her tone sharp. Lyra's claims are exaggerated and inflammatory. David listened intently, piecing together the narrative. Xylium, it seemed, was the key to Xylos's problems. A rare mineral with immense energy potential, it was also the source of a bitter power struggle. The governing council, led by the ambitious General Kale, controlled the majority of xylium deposits, leaving the Northern Coalition, a region with a strong sense of independence, in a state of economic hardship. As they approached the capital, the landscape transformed. Gleaming towers of crystal and metal pierced the sky, connected by intricate bridges and walkways. The city pulsed with life, a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds. But even here, David could sense the tension, the undercurrent of unrest. He noticed heavily armed guards patrolling the streets, their expressions grim and watchful. He was taken to a luxurious suite in the heart of the city, overlooking a vast, sprawling plaza. The accommodations were extravagant, bordering on ostentatious. It was clear that the governing council was eager to impress him. "I trust you will find everything to your liking, Ambassador," Nira said, her eyes scanning the suite. "If you require anything, please do not hesitate to ask." "Thank you, Nira," David replied. "This is more than adequate." Lyra remained silent, her gaze fixed on the plaza below. David could sense her unease, her disapproval of the opulence that surrounded them. "I'm sure Ambassador David is tired from his journey," Nira said, turning to Lyra. "We should allow him to rest and prepare for tomorrow's meetings." Lyra nodded curtly. "Of course. Ambassador, I hope you will take the time to explore our city and learn about our culture." "I intend to," David said, his eyes meeting hers. "I believe understanding is the first step towards resolution." Nira and Lyra departed, leaving David alone in the opulent suite. He walked to the window, gazing out at the city below. It was a stunning sight, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. The tension between Lyra and Nira, the power struggle over xylium, the ever-present guards. Xylos was a powder keg waiting to explode. He spent the afternoon reviewing the briefing materials, trying to glean a better understanding of the political landscape. But the reports were vague, filled with ambiguities and contradictions. He realized that he would have to rely on his own instincts and observations to navigate this treacherous situation. As dusk settled over the city, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold, David decided to take a walk, to immerse himself in the Xylosian culture and get a feel for the pulse of the city. He left his suite, ignoring the subtle protests of his security detail, and ventured out into the bustling streets. The city was alive with activity. Xylosians of all ages strolled through the plazas, laughing and talking. Street vendors hawked exotic foods and wares. Music filled the air, a blend of rhythmic beats and haunting melodies. David wandered aimlessly, observing the people, absorbing the atmosphere. He stopped at a small stall, purchasing a strange, fruit-like object that tasted both sweet and savory. He watched a group of children playing a game with levitating orbs, their laughter echoing through the plaza. For a moment, he allowed himself to relax, to forget the political tensions and the power struggles. He was simply a visitor, experiencing the wonders of a new world. But the illusion was shattered when a sudden commotion erupted nearby. A crowd gathered, shouting and shoving. David pushed his way through the throng, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw two factions clashing, Xylosians dressed in the colors of the Northern Coalition battling with guards loyal to the governing council. Energy weapons flashed, illuminating the scene in bursts of blinding light. The air crackled with the smell of ozone and burning flesh. David watched in horror as the violence escalated, the peaceful atmosphere of the city transformed into a scene of chaos and bloodshed. He saw Lyra at the front of the rebels. This was no longer a simple diplomatic mission. He was caught in the middle of a civil war. A stray energy blast whizzed past his head, narrowly missing him. He ducked for cover, realizing that he was in grave danger. He had to get out of here, back to his suite, back to safety. But as he turned to flee, he saw Neera standing on the edge of the crowd, her face a mask of anguish. Their eyes met, and in that moment, David knew that he was far more entangled in this conflict than he could have ever imagined. The choice he thought he had was already gone. He was involved and there was no turning back. Lyra watched David from the shadows, a ghost amidst the glittering spires of the capital. He was everything she distrusted, an outsider, a diplomat from a planet that likely saw Xylos as nothing more than a source of valuable minerals. Yet, despite her reservations, she couldn't deny the strange pull she felt towards him, a disconcerting mix of suspicion and something akin to fascination. The clash she'd orchestrated last night had been a calculated risk. A show of force, a reminder to the governing council that the Northern Coalition would not be silenced. It had also served another purpose, to gauge David's reaction, to see where his sympathies truly lay. His horrified expression had been telling. Naive, perhaps. Unprepared for the brutal realities of Xylosian politics. But also, maybe, genuinely concerned. She retreated into a darkened alleyway, pulling her cloak tighter around her. The cool night air offered a small measure of solace, a temporary escape from the suffocating tension that permeated the city. She closed her eyes, and a memory surfaced, unbidden. Years ago, before the xylium was discovered, before the greed and corruption had poisoned their world, Lyra and Neera had been inseparable. They were sisters, confidants, two halves of a whole. They'd spent their childhood exploring the lush forests of their ancestral home, swimming in the crystal-clear rivers, dreaming of a future where Xylos would be a beacon of peace and prosperity. Lyra remembered the day they'd found a hidden grove, a secret sanctuary bathed in the ethereal glow of bioluminescent flora. They'd made a pact, etched into the bark of an ancient tree, to protect Xylos, to fight for its future, together. But xylium had changed everything. The mineral's discovery had unleashed a torrent of ambition and avarice, tearing their family, their society, and their bond apart. Kale, a ruthless general with a hunger for power, had seized control of the governing council, exploiting xylium for his own personal gain. Neera, driven by a misguided sense of duty and a fear of chaos, had sided with him, becoming his trusted advisor. Lyra had chosen a different path, a path of resistance. She had joined the Northern Coalition, a rebel group fighting to liberate Xylos from Kale's tyrannical rule. She had seen firsthand the suffering caused by his policies, the poverty, the oppression, the blatant disregard for the lives of her people. She would not stand idly by while Kale destroyed everything she held dear. The memory faded, leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. She opened her eyes, the resolve hardening within her. She had a duty to fulfill, a promise to keep. Even if it meant sacrificing everything, even if it meant facing her own sister as an enemy. She needed David. Not for his charm, not for his supposed diplomatic skills, but for his access to information, to resources. He was a pawn, a tool to be used in her fight against Kale. She hated herself for manipulating him, for exploiting his naivete. But she couldn't afford to be sentimental. The fate of Xylos hung in the balance. She contacted one of her informants, a low-level bureaucrat with access to the council's communication network. She needed information on Kale's next shipment of xylium, the route, the security measures. The informant was hesitant, fearful of the consequences if he were caught. "I understand your concerns," Lyra said, her voice low and persuasive. "But you must understand the stakes. Kale is destroying our planet. He is poisoning our people. If we don't stop him, there will be nothing left. The informant relented, agreeing to provide the information in exchange for safe passage out of the city. Lyra promised him sanctuary in the Northern Coalition's territory. She trusted him about as far as she could throw a grav tank, but she had no other choice. The information arrived a few hours later, encrypted and heavily guarded. Lyra spent the rest of the night deciphering it, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. The shipment was scheduled to depart within the next 3 cycles, bound for an off-world refinery controlled by Kale's allies. The security was tight, but not impenetrable. She had a plan. A dangerous plan, but one that could cripple Kale's operation and provide the Northern Coalition with much-needed resources. She would need David's help. Not directly, of course. She couldn't risk revealing her true intentions. But she could use his presence, his diplomatic immunity, to create a diversion, to distract Kale's forces while her team intercepted the shipment. She found David the next morning in the city's central plaza, surrounded by a gaggle of Xylosian officials. He looked tired, disheveled, clearly overwhelmed by the complexities of Xylosian politics. She approached him, forcing a smile. "Ambassador David," she said, her voice a melodic chime. "I hope you are enjoying your stay in our city." David turned, his eyes lighting up slightly at the sight of her. "Lyra," he said, his voice warm. "It's good to see you. This city is, quite something." "Indeed," Lyra replied, her gaze sweeping across the plaza. "But beneath the surface beauty, there are undercurrents. Tensions. Perhaps I could offer you a tour, show you the real Xylos, beyond the glittering facades." David hesitated, glancing at the Xylosian officials who were watching them with undisguised suspicion. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate," he said, his voice cautious. "Appropriate?" Lyra scoffed, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Since when has diplomacy been about being appropriate? Sometimes, Ambassador, you have to step outside the established norms to truly understand a situation." David considered her words, his expression thoughtful. "Perhaps you're right," he said finally. "I'd be interested in seeing this real Xylos you speak of." Lyra smiled, a genuine smile this time. "Excellent. Meet me at the Obsidian Gate tomorrow at dawn. And come prepared for a journey." She spent the rest of the day preparing for the mission, gathering her team, securing the necessary equipment, finalizing the details of the plan. She tried to push David out of her mind, to focus on the task at hand. But his image kept intruding, his kind eyes, his earnest demeanor, his surprising vulnerability. She knew she was playing a dangerous game. Entangling herself with an outsider, a human, was foolish, reckless. But she couldn't deny the spark that had ignited between them, the undeniable connection that transcended their different worlds. As darkness fell, she received a message from one of her spies within the governing council. The message was brief, urgent: "Be careful, Lyra. You are being watched. Nira knows." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. Nira. How could she have been so blind? So foolish to trust her own sister. Nira knew her plans, knew about David, knew everything. And she had betrayed her. She barely had time to react when the alarms blared, the city plunged into chaos. The sound of energy weapons echoed through the streets, growing closer with each passing moment. Kale's forces were closing in. She was trapped. Then the ground started shaking. Charles stared at Zarek, the minister's words hanging in the air like a charged particle beam. Mating season. The phrase echoed in his mind, colliding with memories of T's feverish touch and the primal hunger in her eyes. Across the room, T bristled, her azure skin shimmering with barely restrained energy. "You should have been warned," Zarek said coldly, his gaze flicking to T. "But someone neglected protocol." T stepped forward, her voice a dangerous purr. "He's mine, Zarek. The bond is sealed. Challenge me, and you invoke the Raktal." The minister's jaw tightened at the unfamiliar term, but Charles didn't miss the flicker of unease in the older Azuran's eyes. Before he could ask, Zarek turned abruptly. This changes nothing. The Trade Council convenes at dusk. Be prepared, Ambassador. As Zarek stormed out, Charles rounded on T. Explain. Now. She hesitated, her defiant posture softening. The Raktal is our oldest law. Once a mate is chosen, rivals must duel for claim. To the death, if necessary. Charles's stomach dropped. Death? This is why everyone's been staring at me. Because I'm some prize in a gladiatorial contest. T's fingers grazed his wrist, the contact sending a jolt through him. You're more than that. The bond heightens our senses, our instincts. To others, you're a catalyst. A symbol of power. My rivals will seek to take you, not just for pleasure, but to weaken my standing. Your standing? Charles pulled away, incredulous. I'm a diplomat, not a political pawn. You're both now, T said quietly. The mating bond intertwines us. My enemies become yours. The banquet hall thrummed with tension. Dozens of Azurans reclined on floating divans, their luminous eyes tracking Charles as he entered. T walked beside him, her hand possessively on his lower back. The air smelled of spiced nectar and ozone. Zarek stood at the head of a crescent-shaped table, flanked by counselors. Ambassador Hawthorne, he intoned. Let us discuss your proposal. Charles unrolled a holographic scroll detailing Earth's offer, advanced terraforming tech in exchange for Azurus's crystalline energy cores. But as he spoke, whispers rippled through the room. A lithe Azuran female with cobalt-streaked hair leaned forward, her gaze predatory. Tell me, Ambassador, does your enthusiasm for negotiation extend beyond trade agreements? Laughter fizzed among the attendees. T's claws unsheathed slightly, glinting in the bioluminescent light. Counselor Vera, Zarek warned, though his tone held amusement. Vera ignored him, slinking toward Charles. You smell like desperation, Earthman. And her. She shot T a venomous look. A poor choice. I could show you true communion. T moved like lightning, blocking Vera's path. Invoke the Raktal, then. Let the sands decide. The room stilled. Charles's translator implant struggled with the sudden barrage of guttural Azuran chanting, Raktal. Raktal. Vera's lips curled. So be it. The duel arena was a sunken pit filled with iridescent sand that glowed faintly, as if charged with starlight. Azurans crowded the upper tiers, their excited murmurs echoing. Charles stood trapped in a spectator's ledge, Zarek's hand heavy on his shoulder. This is barbaric, Charles hissed. This is tradition, Zarek replied. If T dies, you'll belong to Vera. If Vera dies, her faction collapses. Either way, the council benefits. Below, T and Vera circled each other, stripped to combat leathers. Vera's body shifted unnaturally, bones elongating into bladed ridges, a predatory metamorphosis Charles hadn't known Azurans could perform. T remained humanoid but began to glow, her skin radiating ultraviolet light. First blood. Vera taunted. To the yield, T corrected. They collided in a blur of claws and light. Charles watched, horrified yet mesmerized. Vera fought with feral brutality, but T moved like liquid energy, her strikes precise. When Vera lunged, T pivoted, slashing her talons across the rival's ribs. Azure blood splattered the sand. Vera staggered, then laughed. You think this ends tonight? Her eyes locked on Charles. He'll beg for me when the fever takes him. T froze. You wouldn't dare. Too late. Vera's tongue darted out, revealing a needle-like gland. I slipped it into his wine at the banquet. By dawn, he'll burn for anyone. Even you won't be enough. T's roar shook the arena. She tackled Vera, their struggle dissolving into a violent haze. When the sand settled, T stood panting, Vera's limp body at her feet. The crowd erupted. Back in Charles's quarters, T pressed a trembling hand to his chest. The fever, it's accelerating. He felt it now, a fire in his veins, his skin hypersensitive. What did she do to me? A pheromone trigger. It forces the bond into overdrive. T's pupils dilated. I can stabilize you, but... But what? Her claws pricked his shirt. It requires full symbiosis. Deeper than last night. Dangerous for a human. Charles's communicator buzzed with Zarek's summons. The trade vote was imminent. T kissed him fiercely. Choose, Charles. Your duty, or us. Outside, the twin suns dipped low, painting the sky in violent hues. Somewhere, Vera's allies stirred. And the fever burned hotter. Cliffhanger. As Charles struggles against the phenomenal haze, Zarek reveals Earth's terraforming tech is a weapon, and Vera's faction storms the council chamber, demanding Charles's execution as a spy. Charles's vision swam as the phenomenal fever clawed at his resolve. T's skin burned against his, her breath hot on his neck as she shielded him from the advancing mob. Vera's allies, a dozen azure-skinned warriors with bladed ridges erupting from their forearms, circled the council chamber. Their leader, a hulking Azuran with scars across his chest, snarled, "The human dies. Now." Zarek raised a three-fingered hand. This is madness. The human's tech is a weapon, yes, but not against us. Earth's terraforming devices could stabilize our dying core. Lies, the scarred warrior spat. The Offworlder's gift will reduce Azurus to ash. T hissed, her claws elongating. Touch him, and I'll peel the flesh from your bones. Charles's communicator buzzed, an emergency alert from Earth Command. Ambassador, abort mission. Azuran spies intercepted files proving Zarek plans to weaponize, the message dissolved into static. Fascinating, Zarek murmured, plucking the device from Charles's hand. Your people are quicker than I anticipated. T froze. You knew. You wanted this conflict. Zarek's smile was glacial. Chausis opportunity. With Earth blamed for Vera's death and the council in disarray, I will rule. The chamber doors exploded. Chaos erupted. Vera's faction surged forward, their claws slashing. T shoved Charles behind a crystalline pillar, her body radiating ultraviolet light. Stay close. I'm not helpless, Charles snapped, grabbing a fallen guard's energy pistol. You're burning, T retorted. The fever had turned his veins luminescent, his sweat glittering like stardust. Zarek's voice boomed above the fray. Kill the human. His death secures our future. Charles fired wildly, adrenaline overriding the fever's haze. A warrior lunged, T intercepted, her claws tearing through his throat. Azure blood sprayed as she roared, I said stay back. Their eyes met. Something primal passed between them, a surge of shared rage, fear, need. The bond, T gasped. It's evolving. Let me. Do it, Charles growled. She bit his shoulder. Fire flooded his veins. Time fractured. Charles's senses sharpened, he could see molecular vibrations, taste the warrior's adrenaline. His muscles coiled with unnatural strength. A blade swung at his head, he caught it midair, snapping the metal. T stared, awed. You're adapting. Zarek's warriors faltered. The scarred leader bellowed, abomination. Charles moved faster than thought. Disarming two attackers, he slammed their skulls together. T fought beside him, their movements synchronized as if sharing one mind. Zarek retreated toward a holographic control panel. Enough. He slammed his fist on the console. The chamber shuddered, gravity reversed. Charles and T crashed into the ceiling, pinned alongside friend and foe. Zarek floated freely, protected by a personal dampening field. A fitting end, he sneered. A human-Azuran hybrid, crushed by his own hubris. T strained against the gravity, her hand inching toward Charles. Merge with me. Fully. Will it kill us? Yes. Or make us gods? Their fingers intertwined. The universe exploded into light. Cliffhanger, their symbiotic union triggers a shockwave that shatters Zarek's gravity field, and awakens an ancient Azuran AI buried beneath the council chambers. Its holographic form materializes, declaring, "The Devourer of Worlds has returned. Only the bonded may stop it." The holographic AI shimmered into existence, its form an intricate tapestry of light and energy, an echo of an ancient Xylosian being. The Devourer of Worlds has returned. Only the bonded may stop it. David stared, his mind struggling to comprehend. Lyra and Nira exchanged a look of profound understanding, a shared knowledge that transcended their political divide. What is it talking about? David stammered, the phenomenal haze momentarily receding. Lyra stepped forward, her voice filled with a somber reverence. The Devourer is a legend, a myth. An ancient entity that feeds on planetary cores, consuming worlds to sustain itself. Nira nodded, her gaze fixed on the holographic AI. It was believed to have been defeated millennia ago, by a pair of bonded ones. Two Xylosians who shared a connection so profound, they could channel the planet's energy. David looked from Lyra to Nira, the implications dawning on him. You're saying, you two are the bonded? The AI turned its ethereal gaze upon them. The resonance confirms. The blood of the ancients flows within you. Only by uniting your power can you hope to stand against the Devourer. Kale, who had been momentarily stunned into silence, found his voice. This is absurd. A fairy tale. I will not be swayed by ancient prophecies. He raised his energy pistol, aiming it at the AI. Begone, phantom. Before he could fire, Lyra and Nira moved in unison, their hands outstretched. A surge of energy erupted from them, coalescing into a shimmering shield that deflected Kale's blast. The energy rebounded, striking Kale, sending him sprawling to the ground. You cannot deny the truth, Kale, Lyra said, her voice resonating with power. The Devourer is real. And it is drawn to Xylium. Nira nodded. Your greed has awakened it, Kale. Your exploitation of Xylium has weakened the planet's defenses, making it vulnerable. Kale struggled to his feet, his face contorted with rage. Lies. I am trying to save Xylos, to bring prosperity to our people. Prosperity at the cost of our planet's destruction? Lyra countered. You are a fool, Kale, blinded by your own ambition. David watched, his mind racing. The phenomenal fever still pulsed within him, amplifying his emotions, blurring the lines between reality and illusion. But he knew one thing for certain, Xylos was in grave danger. And he, somehow, was caught in the middle of it. He stepped forward, placing himself between Lyra and Nira. What do we need to do? How do we stop the Devourer? The AI turned its gaze upon him. The Devourer is drawn to the Xylium core, the source of the planet's energy. You must reach the core and sever the connection, before the Devourer consumes it entirely. The Xylium core is heavily guarded, Nira said. Kale has fortified it with his most loyal troops. Then we will have to fight our way through, Lyra replied, her eyes hardening with determination. We have no other choice. The journey to the Xylium core was fraught with peril. David, Lyra, and Nira led a small band of rebels, navigating treacherous tunnels and evading Kale's patrols. The phenomenal fever continued to rage within David, blurring his senses, amplifying his emotions. He found himself drawn to both Lyra and Nera, his feelings a confusing mix of desire, respect, and a deep, inexplicable connection. Lyra fought with a fierce determination, her energy blade cutting through Kale's troops with deadly precision. Nera, once a staunch supporter of the government, now fought alongside her sister, her loyalty to Xylos outweighing her allegiance to Kale. David, despite his lack of combat training, held his own, relying on his instincts and the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He discovered a surprising aptitude for energy weapons, his aim surprisingly accurate. As they neared the Xylium core, they encountered Kale himself, standing before a massive energy shield, surrounded by his elite guard. "So," Kale sneered, "the bonded ones have come to challenge me. You are fools if you think you can stop me. I am the only one who can save Xylos." "You are destroying it, Kale," Lyra retorted, her energy blade crackling with power. "Your greed will be the end of us all. I am securing our future." Kale shouted. "Once I have harnessed the full power of Xylium, Xylos will be invincible. There is no invincibility in destroying everything that makes us who we are." Nera cried. A fierce battle ensued. Lyra and Nera fought with the combined fury of the bonded, their energy attacks tearing through Kale's guard. David fought alongside them, his energy pistol blazing, his body moving with a speed and agility he never knew he possessed. But Kale was a formidable opponent, his energy shield deflecting their attacks, his own blasts of power threatening to overwhelm them. He focused his attention on David, seeing him as the weakest link. "You are nothing but a pawn, Earthling," Kale sneered. "A tool to be used and discarded." He unleashed a powerful blast of energy, aimed directly at David. Lyra and Nera cried out in alarm, but it was too late. The energy struck David, sending him flying backwards, crashing against a wall. He lay there, dazed and injured, the phenomenal fever reaching a fever pitch. He could feel his life ebbing away. Lyra and Nera rushed to his side, their faces filled with anguish. "David, no!" Lyra cried, cradling his head in her lap. "We cannot lose you," Nera said, her voice trembling. "You are the key." David looked up at them, his vision blurring. "The key, to what?" "To uniting us," Lyra said. "To channeling the full power of the bond." Nera nodded. "We need you, David. You are the catalyst." David closed his eyes, gathering his remaining strength. He reached out, taking their hands in his. He could feel their energy flowing through him, a surge of power that transcended the physical realm. He opened his eyes, his gaze meeting theirs. "I understand," he said, his voice weak but resolute. "I am ready." Together, the three of them rose to their feet, their bodies glowing with an ethereal light. They channeled their combined energy, focusing it on the energy shield that protected the Xylium core. The shield flickered and strained, unable to withstand the onslaught of their combined power. With a final surge of energy, they shattered the shield, leaving the Xylium core exposed. Kale stared in disbelief, his face contorted with horror. "No. This cannot be." Lyra, Nera, and David turned their attention to the Xylium core, a pulsating sphere of pure energy. They reached out, their hands touching the surface of the core. A wave of energy washed over them, transporting them to a different realm, a place of pure consciousness, where the boundaries of space and time ceased to exist. They saw the Devourer, a monstrous entity of darkness, its tendrils reaching out to consume the Xylium core. They knew that if they failed, Xylos would be doomed. Together, they channeled their combined energy, focusing it on the Devourer. They fought with the power of their love, their loyalty, and their shared commitment to saving Xylos. The battle raged for what seemed like an eternity, but finally, with a final, desperate surge of energy, they vanquished the Devourer, severing its connection to the Xylium core. They found themselves back in the chamber, the Xylium core glowing with a renewed intensity. Kale lay defeated at their feet, his ambition shattered, his dreams in ruins. Xylos was safe. For now. In the aftermath, Xylos began to heal. Lyra and Neera, united in their purpose, worked together to rebuild their world, to heal the divisions that had torn them apart. David prepared to leave, his diplomatic mission complete. He knew that he would never forget his time on Xylos, the challenges he had faced, the bonds he had forged. He said goodbye to Lyra and Neera, his heart heavy with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. He knew that their connection was something special, something that transcended the boundaries of planets and cultures. As his shuttle lifted off, carrying him back to Earth, he looked back at Xylos, a vibrant, shimmering world, bathed in the light of its twin suns. He knew that he was leaving a piece of himself behind, a piece that would forever remain entwined with the fate of Xylos and the two extraordinary women who had changed his life forever. The Xylos affair was over. But the echoes of their bond would resonate through the stars, a testament to the power of love, loyalty, and the enduring spirit of hope.